You ever carry a secret so heavy it bends your shoulders? Even after all these years, mine isn't just a memory. It's a scar carved into every part of who I am. People see me now, gray curls, warm smile, tending to my herb garden on the porch of my little home in Apalachicola, and they think I've lived a quiet, sweet life. But there's a chapter I never speak of, a time I buried so deep that even my late husband never fully knew. Because when your boss abuses you and no one believes you, you learn to survive in silence. My name is Peggy Campbell. I'm 76 years old now, but once upon a time, I was a wide-eyed 28-year-old woman stepping into the world with a typewriter in my hand and hope in my heart. The year was 1976. Jimmy Carter had just been elected, and I thought everything in my life was about to change for the better. Back then, Apalachicola was quieter than it is now, fewer tourists, more locals, and not much space for a young woman like me to dream big. I had just gotten hired as a secretary at a shipping company called Gulf Bay Logistics, tucked in an old brick building near the harbor. My mother had cleaned houses her whole life, and she used to tell me, "Peggy, use your smarts. Don't end up scrubbing other people's sinks like I did." So when I landed that office job, I felt like I'd made it. The office smelled of old paper and strong coffee. The walls were lined with filing cabinets that clanked when you opened them. I remember the morning light hitting the wooden floors, the ringing phones, the shuffle of papers. I felt important, like I finally had a seat at a grown-up table. My boss, Harold Whitaker, was the company's regional director. He wore crisp suits, smoked cigars in his office when no one was watching, and had a southern charm that could disarm you if you weren't careful. Folks in town respected him. At company picnics, he'd hand out checks to charities and give speeches about family values and hard work. To a girl like me, young, eager, and raised to be polite, he seemed powerful, maybe even kind, but it didn't take long for that illusion to crack. At first, it was small things, his hand resting too long on my shoulder when he passed my desk, calling me sweetheart or darlin' in a tone that felt wrong. One time, he stood behind me as I typed, breathing close to my neck. I laughed it off, because what else could I do? I needed that job. I had rent to pay. I had no one to fall back on. When I mentioned it to Susan Dillard, the head of HR, she gave me a tight smile and said, "Oh, Harold's just old-fashioned. Don't let it get to you." I wanted to believe she was right, that I was being dramatic, that maybe I misunderstood, but deep down, I knew better. Still, I stayed, because in those days, women like me didn't just quit. We endured. We were raised to be grateful, not to make waves. That's how it starts. Not with screams, not with bruises, but with a steady erosion of your boundaries. Until one day, there's nothing left to protect. I can still remember the morning that changed everything. I'd worn a pale yellow blouse that day. It had little flowers on it, a gift from my sister. I felt cheerful, for no particular reason, but Harold must have taken my smile as permission. What happened in his office that day? Well, I'll get to that soon, but let me just say I didn't walk out the same woman who walked in. And when I finally did speak up, no one believed me, not Susan, not the other secretaries, not even Marcia Connors, who had seen enough to know the truth but kept her mouth shut out of fear. For nearly 5 decades, I kept this story locked away. I lived a life, yes. I married a good man. I raised 2 children. I baked cookies for bake sales and read novels under oak trees. But there was always a shadow, a quiet ache in my chest every time I heard the word boss. Now, at 76, with most of my friends retired and some even gone, I've come to realize I can't leave this world with this truth still buried, because somewhere out there, another woman may be living her own version of this story. And maybe, just maybe, if she hears mine, she'll find the strength to speak. That's why I'm telling it now. All of it. When I first walked into Gulf Bay Logistics, I thought I'd found my place. The office wasn't fancy, but it had that sense of movement, of people working towards something. I was proud to be part of it, even if my job was mostly typing invoices and answering phones. My desk sat near a window that overlooked the docks. From there, I'd watch the tugboats drift in and out of the harbor, gulls circling above, and dock workers shouting from the waterline. It gave me a feeling of being connected to something bigger. I was earning my own money, wearing pressed blouses and kitten heels, feeling like a real adult. At first, Harold Whitaker seemed like every Southern gentleman I'd been warned about, charming, well-spoken, always ready with a compliment. On my first day, he walked by and said, "Now that's a pretty smile. Miss Campbell, you'll brighten this place right up." I blushed, smiled politely. Back then, you didn't correct men like that, not if you wanted to keep your job. He had a reputation. People called him old school, which was their polite way of saying he didn't think women belonged above the receptionist line. But they also said he was generous. He once paid for a secretary's hospital bill, bought new suits for a young accountant starting his career. To the public, Harold was a pillar of Apalachicola, but inside the office walls, there were whispers. The kind of whispers that disappeared the second you turned around, and the women. We carried those whispers in the way we avoided eye contact when the door to his office closed. In the way we learned to never be the last one in the break room, in how we laughed a little too hard at his jokes so he wouldn't pick someone else to target. I didn't recognize the signs at first. One afternoon, I was filing purchase orders when Harold came up behind me. His hand brushed the small of my back. "You're quick with those fingers," he said, grinning. I froze. My stomach twisted. He walked away like nothing had happened. Later, I mentioned it to Susan Dillard, our HR manager. She was older than me, wore smart blazers, and kept her hair in a tight bun. I trusted her, or wanted to. But Susan just chuckled and said, "You'll get used to Harold. He means well. Just don't let it get to you." Sugar. That word sugar clung to me like something sticky and wrong. From then on, I noticed the patterns. Harold never made comments like that to the younger male staffers, just us women, just when no one else was listening. He'd ask me to stay late to help organize paperwork, even though that was never in my job description. He'd close the door behind me and let his eyes linger too long. He'd touch my arm when I handed him papers, too softly, too long. Sometimes his fingers brushed the inside of my wrist, and I'd pull away, only to see that smug little smirk, like he enjoyed watching me squirm. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was overreacting. After all, it wasn't like he had hurt me yet. But the truth is, abuse doesn't always start with violence. Sometimes it starts with power and silence and the weight of needing a paycheck more than your pride. One morning, I arrived early and found Harold already in his office, tie loosened, cigar still burning in the ashtray. He called me in. "I've been thinking, Peggy," he said, "you're special, smart, capable. You shouldn't be stuck behind that desk." "How'd you like to become my personal assistant?" I was surprised, flattered, even until I saw the way he looked at me. It wasn't about my typing skills. It wasn't about promoting me. It was about pulling me closer, where no one else could see. I mumbled something about needing time to think. His smile turned cold. "Don't take too long," he said. "Opportunities don't wait forever." I walked back to my desk, trembling. Over the next few weeks, the pressure built. Harold would call me into his office for things he could have asked over the intercom. He'd stand too close, breathe too heavily, brush lint from my shoulder that wasn't there. I began to dread mornings. I started skipping lunch just to avoid being in the break room at the same time as him. I confided in Marcia Connors, one of the other secretaries. She looked at me with pity, but kept her voice low. "We've all been there," she said. "Best thing you can do is smile, stay quiet, and keep your job. Trust me." I remember walking home that night, the Florida air thick and warm, but my skin cold with shame. I felt like I was slowly disappearing. People like Harold didn't need fists to break you down. They used words and glances and the knowledge that no one would ever believe you over them. I didn't know it then, but I was on the edge of a cliff, and soon I'd be pushed. It happened on a Friday. Funny how I remember the smallest details: the blouse I wore, the way the coffee machine sputtered that morning, the faint smell of cedar polish on Harold's desk. But most of all, I remember the silence afterward, the kind of silence that wraps around you like a shroud. That morning had started like any other. I came in early, as I always did. I'd hoped to avoid Harold, maybe get a few quiet moments to myself before the office filled with the usual chatter. But no sooner had I sat down than I heard his voice through the intercom. "Miss Campbell, could you come to my office for a moment? I didn't want to go." My hands trembled as I smoothed my skirt. I told myself it would just be quick. Maybe he'd ask for a letter typed or files from storage. I told myself I could handle it. I always had. The door clicked shut behind me as I stepped into his office. The blinds were drawn. His tie was off. He was sitting on the edge of his desk, sleeves rolled up. "You look lovely today, Peggy," he said. I kept my eyes on the folder I was carrying. "You asked for the monthly purchase reports." He didn't reach for them. Instead, he stood and walked toward me, slow like a predator sizing up prey. I backed up a step, but the wall caught me. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest like it wanted to claw its way out. "Don't be nervous," he murmured. "Too close now. I think we've built a good working relationship. Don't you?" "Please don't," I whispered. But he didn't listen. He touched my face, slid his hand down my arm. I froze. My brain screamed at me to move, to yell, to fight, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed with fear, shame, disbelief. How had I let it come to this? He leaned in and tried to kiss me. That's when I snapped. I shoved him hard, the folder falling to the floor, papers scattering like frightened birds. "Don't touch me," I cried. Harold stumbled back, startled, and then his expression changed, from smug to cold. He adjusted his shirt cuffs and said, calm as ever, "You need to calm down. Peggy, you're hysterical. Maybe take the rest of the day off." I rushed out of the office, eyes burning, legs shaking beneath me. By the time I made it to the restroom, I collapsed in one of the stalls, sobbing into my hands. My blouse was wrinkled, my dignity shredded. I told myself I couldn't let it slide this time. Enough was enough. That afternoon, I went to see Susan Dillard again. I told her everything, how he had been harassing me for months, how that morning he crossed the line. I watched her face closely as I spoke, searching for understanding, for outrage, for anything, but all she did was sigh. Peggy, you know Harold's been with this company for 25 years. He's a respected man. So, what I snapped. That doesn't give him the right. Do you have any proof? She asked quietly. I'm telling you the truth. She pressed her lips together. I'll make a note of your concern, but I'd advise you to let this go. It's your word against his. And frankly, he says you were the one who got too comfortable. The breath was knocked out of me. I stared at her, stunned. He said that Susan nodded. He claims you misread his friendliness, that you've been acting emotional lately. I felt like I was falling down a hole I couldn't escape. It didn't stop there. The next Monday, I noticed the change. Marcia Connors, who used to chat with me at the coffee pot, barely made eye contact. My assignments started getting reassigned to others. I was excluded from team meetings. Whispers followed me through the hallway, like shadows I couldn't shake. By Friday, Susan called me into her office again. We're restructuring, she said, not meeting my eyes. Your position's being phased out. I was being fired. I didn't even cry right away. I just nodded, numb, gathered my things from my desk as quickly as I could. The office looked the same windows, same dust motes in the air, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I was a ghost passing through. I walked out of that building into the Florida sun, but I swear it felt like I was stepping into darkness. That night, I sat alone on my apartment floor, a cardboard box of desk belongings at my feet. A photo of my mama slipped out. She'd died just a few years earlier, and I clutched it like a lifeline. I'm sorry, Mama, I whispered. I thought I was doing what you told me. I thought I was using my smarts, but look what it got me. I wish I could say someone came to my defense, that Harold got what he deserved, but that's not how things worked in 1976, not in Apalachicola. Not for women like me. Instead, I learned how to survive. In silence, with shame, and a scar that no one could see but I felt every single day. There's a kind of loneliness that sets in after you've been betrayed by the world you thought you understood. It's not the same as being alone. No, it's deeper than that. Like you've been locked out of something everyone else has access to trust. Safety, belonging. After I left Gulf Bay Logistics, I didn't tell anyone what had really happened. What was the point? I had already tried. I had already been dismissed, ignored, and quietly pushed out the door like a stain the company didn't want on its polished image. I couldn't bear the thought of going back to an office. The sound of leather chairs creaking, the scent of aftershave, the click of men's shoes on tile, all of it made my skin crawl. So I took whatever work I could find, waitressing at a seafood diner down by the water, helping an elderly neighbor with bookkeeping, even folding towels at a laundromat just off Route 98. Each job paid little, and none came with dignity. But they gave me distance from Harold, distance from that building, distance from who I used to be. In public, I smiled. In private, I slept with the lights on. For the longest time, I couldn't bring myself to wear anything yellow, the color I had on that day. It hung in the closet like a ghost I couldn't throw away. And then there was the shame, the way it burrowed into my bones. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but it didn't matter. I felt tainted, like Harold had touched something in me I couldn't scrub clean. I stopped going to church, stopped attending my cousin's bridge nights. I even stopped writing in my journal. My words had dried up, choked by fear and humiliation. Years passed that way. Then, in the fall of 1982, I met Walter. He was a mechanic, widowed young, quiet in a kind, comforting way. We bumped into each other at the farmer's market, literally. I had dropped a bag of apples, and he helped gather them without saying a word, just smiled and handed one back. We started talking, then meeting, then sitting together under the cypress trees near Battery Park, watching the boats come in, sipping sweet tea. It felt like breathing again, like I might be allowed to feel normal. Walter didn't push. He didn't pry. He just showed up, week after week, rain or shine. I told him about my mama, my love for poetry, how I used to dream of becoming a journalist. But I never told him about Harold. I couldn't. That door was sealed shut. Every time I got close to opening it, something inside me shriveled. We got married a year later. Simple ceremony. Just the two of us and a judge at the courthouse. I wore a pale blue dress. No veil, no guests. I told Walter I didn't like attention. He didn't ask why. We built a modest life. He fixed cars. I worked part-time at the public library. We adopted a dog, then later a cat. I planted herbs in the front yard and cooked dinner every night like clockwork. To anyone looking from the outside, it probably seemed like a peaceful life. But inside, I still carried the fear. When Walter would come up behind me and touch my shoulders, I'd flinch just a little, enough for him to notice, but not enough for him to question. When we made love, I'd sometimes stare at the ceiling, holding my breath until it was over, even though he was always gentle. He deserved more than what I gave him, but I didn't know how to give it. Harold's shadow had never really left. It followed me into every job, every relationship, every room with a closed door. It shaped the way I saw myself as weak, as used, as someone who'd failed to stand up when it mattered most. And yet I lived. I survived. Not loudly, not triumphantly, but quietly, with small rituals, making tea each morning at sunrise, volunteering at the library's reading program, writing letters I never sent to the girl I used to be. By the time I was in my 60s, Walter had started to slow down. His back gave him trouble, and he spent more time in his recliner with the radio on low. We grew older together, not with grand adventures, but with quiet understanding. He passed in his sleep when I was 68, no warning, just gone. I sat on the edge of our bed that morning, staring at the indentation he left behind on the pillow. I pressed my face into it, inhaling what remained of him, and I wept not just for him, but for all the things I'd never told him, for the woman he thought he knew, for the love I could never fully give because a man like Harold had stolen so much from me. So long ago, the grief cracked something open in me. After Walter's funeral, I went back to that closet. I reached behind the coats and boxes and pulled out that pale yellow blouse I hadn't touched in decades. I held it against my chest and whispered, "You don't get to own me anymore." Then I folded it gently and put it away for good. That was the first step, the first time I dared to look backward without crumbling. I still didn't speak it out loud, not yet, but a shift had started. The truth was still buried, but it had begun to stir. It was a Wednesday morning when I saw her. The sun was cutting through the windows of the library just right, turning everything golden. I was putting away a stack of returned books, mostly cookbooks, and a few paperback mysteries when I heard a voice ask, softly, "Excuse me, do you still carry large print biographies?" I turned around, and for a second, my mind couldn't quite place her. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, and time had carved soft lines into her face. But her eyes, hazel with a fleck of green, hadn't changed at all. "Marcia," I asked, stunned. She blinked at me, just as surprised. "Peggy Campbell." She let out a breathy laugh. Lord, it's been, 40 years? 42, I whispered. We stood there in a strange silence, like ghosts bumping into each other after wandering separate corridors for decades. There were no hugs, no wide smiles, just a quiet tension that hung in the air, like a question neither of us wanted to ask first. I offered to make her a cup of tea, something I kept in the break room for the regulars, and we sat at one of the little round tables near the back. She looked older, yes, but there was still that same nervousness in her hands, the way she tapped her fingers against the ceramic cup, the way she avoided my gaze for too long. It was Marcia who finally said it. You remember Harold Whitaker, don't you? I froze. The sound of his name still hit like ice water down my spine. I remember, I said. She nodded slowly, her eyes glassy. I should have spoken up. Back then, when you told me, I didn't say anything. My throat had tightened. I saw things. Peggy. Things I didn't understand or didn't want to. I was scared. We all were. I swallowed hard, memories rushing back, his hand on my back, the blinds drawn shut, Susan's cold voice. You don't have to apologize, I finally said. Back then, silence felt like the only thing keeping any of us employed. Marcia reached into her purse and pulled out a folded article. He's in the news again, she said, sliding it across the table. It was an editorial from the Tallahassee Gazette. The headline read, Retired Business Leader Faces Accusations from Former Female Employees. My heart thudded as I skimmed the first lines. 3 women had come forward. Harold was now in his 80s and living in a retirement condo near Naples. They claimed years of harassment, manipulation, and retaliation stretching back to the late 70s. The article didn't mention names, but I knew those stories. I'd lived one. He did the same thing to me, Marcia whispered. About a year after you left. And to Janet Ruiz, too. You remember Janet, I nodded. She worked in accounting. Left suddenly. Marcia's voice cracked. Turns out she didn't leave. She was pushed. Just like you. I sat there, stunned. For so long, I thought I was the only one. That maybe I had misunderstood, exaggerated, imagined some of it. That maybe the shame really was mine to carry. But now, hearing Marcia say it, hearing the same fear, the same heartbreak, it was like a dam broke. I began to cry. Not loud, not dramatically, just quiet tears sliding down my cheeks. Marcia reached across the table and took my hand. You weren't crazy, Peggy. You weren't alone, and you still aren't. We sat like that for a long while. 2 older women, both bruised by a man the world had once praised as respectable, and for the first time in over 40 years, I didn't feel invisible. After Marcia left, I locked up early and went home. I sat at my kitchen table, rereading the article again and again. My hands were trembling, but my spirit, it was starting to stir in a new way. The fear hadn't vanished, but something else had taken its place, anger. And beneath that anger, something even stronger, resolve. That night, I pulled out an old notebook and began to write everything I remembered, every comment, every look, every time I was called into his office, every word Susan had said to me that day she let me go. I was done burying this. For the first time, I was going to put it all down, not for revenge, not even for closure, but for truth, for the girl I used to be, for the women who came after me, for the ones still too afraid to speak, because silence may protect the powerful, but truth heals the broken. Writing it all down was harder than I thought it'd be. Some nights, I stared at the blank pages of my notebook for hours, afraid that if I wrote the truth, it would become real again, that I'd be transported back to that office with the blinds closed and his breath on my neck. But I kept going, line by line, memory by memory. I wrote until my hand cramped and the ink smudged beneath tears I didn't even notice falling. Once the notebook was full, I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to burn it. Another part wanted to mail it to Harold's condo with a single line I never forgot. But instead, I picked up the phone and called Marcia. She answered on the second ring. "Peggy, do you still have that article?" I asked. "The one with the journalist's contact." A beat of silence. "Then you're ready, aren't you?" I wasn't sure if ready was the right word, but I was done being silent. Her name was Tina Brooks, a freelance investigative reporter out of Jacksonville. She'd written for regional newspapers, done some profiles on corruption and whistleblower stories. I wasn't sure she'd care about an old woman from Apalachicola who hadn't been in an office in 40 years. But when I called, her voice was warm, patient. "I've already spoken with 2 women who worked under Harold Whitaker," she said. "You'd be the third. I believe you." Those 3 words hit harder than I expected. No hesitation, no second guessing, just belief. We met at the diner on Main Street, the one where I used to pour coffee for truckers in my 20s. It felt strange being there again, older and more fragile, but also somehow stronger. Tina brought a small recorder, a notepad, and a kind of quiet reverence that made it easier to talk. I told her everything, for 4 hours. I laid it all out, how Harold had groomed me, cornered me, violated me, how the company had looked the other way, how I was fired for speaking up, how my life had never been the same after that. Tina didn't interrupt. She didn't rush me. She just listened, and sometimes her eyes welled up too. When I finished, she reached across the table and touched my hand gently. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. "This matters. You matter." 2 weeks later, the article was published. Retired executive Harold Whitaker faces multiple allegations of sexual misconduct. Victims speak out after decades of silence. My name wasn't hidden. I thought I'd be afraid when the article came out, that I'd wake up the next morning and regret it, that someone would call me a liar, or worse, ask why I waited so long. But instead, something incredible happened. I received letters, real letters, not emails from women I'd never met. Some lived in Florida, others as far as Oregon or Illinois. They told me my words had given them courage. One woman wrote, "I thought it was just me. Thank you for reminding me I wasn't crazy." The librarian, Nancy, hugged me the next time I came in. The pastor at the community church left a note in my mailbox that read, "What you did took strength. We're proud of you." Even Janet Ruiz, the woman Marcia mentioned, reached out. She'd been living in Atlanta, working as a paralegal. She told me she'd read the article with tears running down her cheeks. "I wasn't brave enough back then," she wrote, "but I want to be brave now. Count me in." Before I knew it. There were 4 of us, 4 women, once isolated, now joined by truth. We formed a support circle. We met once a month, shared stories, drank tea, and laughed, laughed about how terrified we used to be of a man whose power was really just smoke and mirrors. With Tina's help, we filed a formal complaint with the state board that once granted Harold his business credentials. There wouldn't be criminal charges, too much time had passed, but there would be public accountability. And most importantly, Harold's name was no longer whispered in fear. It was spoken out loud. As for me, I started writing again, not just in notebooks hidden in drawers, but publicly. I began hosting a memoir writing group at the library for older women. Some came with laughter, others with pain, but every story mattered. Every voice was heard. I told them, even if the world didn't believe you back then, I do, and now, so will others. One evening after our meeting, Marcia and I sat on a bench outside the library, watching the sun dip behind the trees. "You think he reads the paper?" she asked. "I hope so." I said, "Think he remembers us?" I turned to her and smiled, not with bitterness, but with calm. He might remember our silence, but now he'll remember our names. You'd think, at 76, I'd be winding things down, rocking on the porch, watching the tide roll in, maybe knitting a bit more than usual, but something in me had reawakened since speaking my truth, and instead of slowing down, I found myself stepping into something I never expected this late in life purpose. After Tina's article was published and the letters began pouring in, the library started getting calls. Women, some young, some even older than me, wanted to talk. They wanted to ask questions. They wanted to be believed. Nancy, our head librarian, approached me one afternoon while I was shelving biographies. She had that look on her face somewhere between concern and encouragement. "Peggy," she said, "I think you ought to start a group, a real one, for women who've been through, well, what you've been through." I hesitated. "You think anyone would come, I don't think?" She said, "I know." And so, on a humid Tuesday in June, we held our first meeting in the library's back room. We didn't call it a support group. That felt too clinical, too heavy. We called it the porch circle because if you'd walked by and heard us talking, it might have sounded like a few friends just swapping stories on a porch swing. There were 5 of us that first day. One woman, Joanne, had never told a soul about what her first husband did behind closed doors in the 1960s. Another, Letitia, had just gotten out of a toxic office job where the CEO made her feel worthless for years. She said reading my article gave her the strength to quit. There was also Maggie, in her 80s, who had lived through something similar during her time as a factory worker during the war and had buried it for over 6 decades. We didn't fix each other. That wasn't the point. We listened. We held hands. We shared tears, but also laughter, real laughter, the kind that bubbles up after years of silence finally break. Every story was different, but the pain that felt familiar. And so did the resilience. I brought cookies some weeks. Others brought poems or photographs. We stitched quilts 1 month each square, representing a story we had carried too long. Mine was yellow, the color I had once feared, but now reclaimed. At first, I worried I wasn't qualified to guide them. I wasn't a counselor. I had no training, but I realized something being willing to sit with someone in their pain is its own kind of wisdom. That group became my sanctuary, my redemption, my legacy. Word started to spread. The porch circle grew. We moved from the library to the community center on 4th Street. A younger woman, Samantha, offered to help coordinate and keep things going for a newer generation of survivors. We even got a small grant from the county for mental health programming. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like what had happened to me was a dark stain. It was a scar, yes, but one I could use to light a path for others. I also started writing publicly essays, reflections, letters to the editor. A small local paper began printing a column I wrote called What I Know Now. In it, I talked about aging, healing, grief, joy, and yes, survival. People began stopping me at the grocery store, at church, even at the post office. Not out of pity, but respect. You made me rethink how I treat my employees. One store owner told me, "I read your column every Sunday," said a teenage girl who reminded me of myself at 28, and I gave it to my mom. She cried. Even my own daughter, Karen, who had grown up never knowing the full weight I carried, sat me down one evening after dinner and said, "Mom, I'm proud of you. I always was. But now, I see you." Those words meant more than I could say, but not everyone was pleased. A man named Don Blevins, a former colleague of Harold's, wrote an angry letter to the paper, accusing me of dragging up the past and destroying the reputation of a good man who can no longer defend himself. I read his words over breakfast one morning and felt my stomach twist. But then I read the 8 letters to the editor that followed, standing up for me, defending survivors, naming Harold for who he truly was. And I realized the truth may take time, but it always finds its way. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the tall pines, I stood in front of our porch circle and shared something I hadn't told anyone. I used to think I lost everything the day Harold put his hands on me. My dignity, my voice, my future. But I see now I didn't lose it. He just tried to bury it, and I've spent every day since digging it back out. The room was silent. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. Then another, and another. It wasn't loud. It wasn't performative. It was real. That night, I sat on my porch, mug of tea in hand, the breeze from the Gulf brushing across my skin. For the first time in a long, long while, I felt whole, not healed entirely. No, some wounds never fully close, but seen, heard, and finally, at peace. It had been almost a year since Tina Brooks first sat across from me in that diner with her recorder and her notepad. Since then, life had changed in ways I never thought possible. I was no longer just a woman who had survived something in silence I had become, somehow, a voice others looked to, a voice that, for decades, I didn't think I had the right to use. Then one morning, Tina called. "They're putting together a panel," she said, "a public hearing on workplace harassment across the state, especially what went unchecked for so long. Survivors, advocates, journalists. I want you there. Peggy, they want to hear your story." I felt the air leave my lungs. Me? Yes. You. I wouldn't have asked if I didn't believe you could make a difference. I told her I'd think about it, but truth be told, I was terrified. Speaking to a reporter was one thing. Leading a circle of women in a small-town library was another. But standing in front of politicians, lawyers, strangers from across the state, my hands shook just imagining it. But then I thought about Maggie, about Letitia, about the teenage girl in the grocery store, about Karen telling me she finally saw me. And I thought, maybe this wasn't about fear anymore. Maybe it was about finishing what I started. So I said yes. The hearing was held in Tallahassee in a wide, echoing chamber that smelled faintly of coffee and photocopier ink. Tina was there, smiling and steady. Marcia came, too. She even brought a tiny locket with her mother's picture inside, as if carrying strength with her. We weren't alone. Dozens of women filled the rows, young, old, black, white, rich, poor. Some wore sharp suits. Others wore simple Sunday dresses, but they all carried something familiar in their eyes, stories they hadn't been allowed to tell. When my name was called, I walked slowly to the podium. I held on to the edges to keep my voice from trembling. "My name is Peggy Campbell." I began. "I'm 76 years old, and when I was 28, My boss locked the door of his office and tried to take something from me I didn't know how to protect. I told them everything, not just about Harold, but about the silence that followed, the HR manager who looked the other way, the job I lost, the life I lived in fear, the years of trying to pretend I was whole, and then about what happened when I finally told the truth. I talked about the porch circle, about the letters from women across the country, about reclaiming my life in a town where people used to look away. I'm not here for revenge, I said. I'm here because the silence didn't protect us. It protected them. And I want to make sure the next generation doesn't have to claw their way out like we did. There was no applause when I finished. This wasn't that kind of event. But the room was still, and when I returned to my seat, Tina reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was warm. Later that week, my name appeared in the state report alongside 3 others. Our stories would be part of the official record. For the first time, Harold Whitaker's name was listed not just as a respected businessman, but as a perpetrator of abuse. The news made waves in Apalachicola. Some old-timers grumbled, but most didn't. A few even thanked me. One woman, probably in her 80s, came up to me outside the bakery, leaned close, and whispered, "I had a Harold too. We just didn't have a name for it back then." I nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel weighed down by the past. I felt lifted. Time moves differently when you get older. Mornings arrive a little slower. The aches in your knees linger longer. You start measuring your days not by what you accomplish, but by what you notice, how the wind shifts in the pines, the way the morning sun hits your front steps, the sound of a neighbor's child laughing down the street, and still, even in these quiet moments, I feel purpose. Since the panel in Tallahassee, more women have come forward. Some found me through the library. Others wrote letters, emails, even little notes slipped beneath the door of the community center. And something beautiful happened. They didn't just come to speak about their pain. They came to learn how to heal, how to begin again. So I started teaching a class, nothing fancy, just one evening a week, in the back room of the library. We called it Letters to Ourselves. The idea was simple. Write a letter to the person you were the day your life changed, the day someone took something from you, or tried to. Some women sobbed as they wrote. Some burned their letters in the fire pit behind the building when they were done. Some framed theirs and hung them above their beds, but all of them, every single one, stood a little taller after. I'll never forget one night, a girl named Monica, no more than 25, sat beside me after class and said, "You make it feel like healing is something I deserve." That sentence knocked the air out of me, because for so long, I didn't believe I deserved it either. I had carried shame like a second skin, worn silence like armor. But now, I see those years differently, not wasted, not ruined, just paused. And finally, I've pressed play. I also started mentoring at the local high school, not as a teacher, but just as someone who listens. Sometimes the girls come to me about bad dates, awkward friendships, or being overlooked in class. But sometimes they come with eyes too quiet for their age. I listen, I nod. And when they're ready, I tell them what I wish someone had told me. It's not your fault. You didn't deserve it. And your voice matters, even when they try to silence it. I never tell them the whole of my story unless they ask. But they always seem to know. There's something in the way survivors recognize one another, like a candle spotting another across a dark room. At home, I've filled my walls with reminders not of what was taken, but of what I reclaimed. There's a photo of the porch circle on the day we finished our quilt, a framed copy of the article Tina wrote, a yellow blouse, newly stitched and never worn, folded gently on a shelf in my closet, not as a memory of pain, but as a symbol of power. Karen visits more now. She brings her own daughter, Jessa, who's just turned 12. The first time Jessa curled up beside me on the porch swing and asked, "Grandma, what makes someone brave?" I smiled and said, "Someone who tells the truth, even when their voice shakes." Walter would have liked her. She has his calm, his steady way of looking at the world. Sometimes, when I see her laughing in the yard, I think about what it means to stop the cycle, to take what hurt you and turn it into something better, brighter, softer, and that's what I'm trying to do now, not to erase the pain, but to soften the edges around it, to make room for hope. I may not have a monument, I may not be in any history book, but if one woman finds her voice because she heard mine first, then that's enough. That's more than enough. Sometimes, when I sit out on the porch in the stillness of the late afternoon, I think back to that 28-year-old version of me, the girl who walked into an office with big dreams and walked out with a wound no one could see. For decades, I thought that moment had defined me, that the silence I was forced into was the end of my story. But now, I know better. That wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a long journey, one that would carry me through heartbreak, shame, growth, and eventually, truth. If there's one thing I've learned in my 76 years, it's this: your voice matters, even if it trembles, even if it's ignored at first, even if it takes decades to find again. It still matters when someone steals your dignity, when they crush your spirit behind closed doors. The world may not see the bruises, but you feel them. And healing begins the moment you speak, the moment you stop hiding from what happened and start honoring the strength it took to survive it. I thought speaking out would break me, but instead it made me whole, because truth, real, raw truth, has a way of lighting up the darkest places. Now, I don't tell my story for sympathy. I tell it so that someone, somewhere, might feel a little less alone, so that another woman, sitting quietly with her pain, might know that she's not broken, she's brave. And if you're reading this, if something in my story stirred something inside you, then maybe you're brave too. Whether you're 20 or 80, know this: it is never too late to speak. It is never too late to begin again. If this story touched your heart, I want to hear from you. Have you ever carried a truth too heavy to tell? Have you ever found the strength to speak when no one else would? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice might be the one that helps someone else find theirs. And if you believe in the power of real stories of healing, hope, and hard-won wisdom, please subscribe to our channel. We have more to tell and more hearts to reach. Thank you for listening to mine. Peggy.